Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library for this webinar presentation. Today's class is Understanding Jurisdictions for Genealogists. Our presenter is James Tanner. James has a passion for genealogy as well as an extensive background in family history and genealogical research. We appreciate his willingness to volunteer his time to share his knowledge and insights into this very important subject. I will now turn the time over to James Tanner.
Okay, well, glad to be here today. We're going to be talking about understanding jurisdictions for genealogists. And first thing we need to know is that the word jurisdictions or jurisdiction has many meanings depending on its context. And let me kind of review some of those. The first one that some of you may be aware of is that there is a legal term that's used. Jurisdiction is used in a legal sense. And that has to do primarily with courts and the court systems in the United States and other places. And so basically what you're talking about when you're talking about jurisdiction in a court system is the ability of the court to make a decision about a case or controversy within its jurisdiction. So for example, if you are speeding in the state of Arizona and you cross the state line, Arizona loses jurisdiction. That doesn't mean you get away. That means that if they want you to be prosecuted in Arizona, they would have to go through a process to get you come back to the state of Arizona to be prosecuted for breaking the law. However, if you crossed into another state, for example, Utah, going north, you would be subject immediately the second you cross the line in Utah. Many of us are familiar with this problem due to the traffic laws in our various states and cities and counties. And many people understand that as they enter a new jurisdiction, they may be subject to a different set of traffic laws, such as speed limits and or other school zones and things like that. Okay, that's the legal part of it. Now, the jurisdictional part that we're talking about from the standpoint of genealogical research has to do with records and has to do with where the records are kept. So in this map, for example, of the counties in Texas, every county in Texas is a different jurisdiction. In other words, the counties keep their own individual records. And the state of Texas is different than each of the counties, the collective counties, and the state of Texas keeps its records. So then we're going to give a definition. So genealogically speaking, a jurisdiction is a private, organizational, or governmental subdivision that keeps records. So anything in the government that's divided up into all the different government agencies and everything else, every one of those would keep their own records, and every private organization keeps its own records. So you may have corporate records that are private, and you may have corporation commission records in the state that oversee the corporations, and they have a different set of records. So there's if you begin to think of this process, your head might explode because there are just an endless number of jurisdictions. A simple way, though, to understand how these work is to think of jurisdictions as piling up like pancakes. Maybe if you haven't eaten, you're hungry, but this does not have anything to do with pancakes per se. At the top level, you would have national or international jurisdictions. National jurisdiction records would be, in the United States, would be things like income tax, federal income tax records, military records from Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all those different organizations. Additional records would be any administrative records in the United States, Bureau of Land Management, the National Forest Service, any government records from the legislature, from the Senate and the House Representatives, and all of the agencies. Those are all national records. And then we have state records, and state records are kept on a state level, and the state level records include all of the things that states take cognizance of. Marriage records, generally speaking, are kept at a county level, but birth and death records now are usually kept at a state level. These things change over time, by the way, also. It's important to understand that what was once a state record may have now become a national record, and what was once a national record may have become a state record. Below the states, or we have in the United States, counties. There are also other kinds of subdivisions, townships. There are cities that are independent cities, like St. Louis, for example, is not part of a county. It is an entity in itself, St. Louis, Missouri. And there are other independent cities. District of Columbia, for example, is not a state, and it's not a county. It is its own organization, an own jurisdictional organization. So what I'm saying is that each of these divisions have their own records, and they maintain those records. And then we have municipalities. That's all different kinds of cities, organizations. We have incorporated cities, unincorporated towns. We have villages, we have townships, we have other things that look like cities but are kept. And each of those have their own set of records, and they're kept in where they happen to keep their records. So then below all of those, we have school districts or other local jurisdictions. We have voting districts. We have census districts, census enumeration districts. We have all these different kinds of ways of organizing people. And each of those types of subdivisions or districts, or whatever you want to call them, are enabled, in a sense, to keep their own records and maintain them where they keep their records. So what happens here is that there's also a pile of other jurisdictions that you've got water districts, you've got utility districts, you could just go on and on. And so there are a multitude. And understanding that the information in each of these different jurisdictional subdivisions is cumulative. It's not repetitious. In other words, the federal government does not keep your school records, the records in your school district. The school district keeps those records. So as you move around from district to district, you're opening up new sets of records that are not involved in any of the other jurisdictions. That doesn't mean that a record couldn't be effective jurisdiction, but as you sit in your home or wherever you happen to be at the moment and are thinking about this process, you can begin to imagine yourself sitting at the bottom of a giant funnel of jurisdictions. So everywhere, as you look out the window, you will see roads. Somebody maintains those roads. That's a set of has jurisdiction over the roads. So therefore, they're keeping records about the roads. If there's a park, then there's a park department that keeps jurisdictions over the parks, and they do the park. If you're paying rent in a homeowners association, then the homeowners association is keeping records, and those records are at that level. And the homeowners association may file documents at a state level because they're recognized as a state entity. They may own land, and the records may be recorded in the county with the county recorder. They may be having to pay taxes. You may have to pay taxes on your home or on your real estate. It just keeps going almost forever. Okay, so how do we begin to learn about this? And from my standpoint, the simplest and easiest way to get started in this concept of jurisdictions is through the family history contained in the FamilySearch.org website and the way the catalog is organized. Because all valuable genealogical records are organized, preserved, and stored geographically by jurisdiction. Now, what that doesn't mean is that the records are stored in the jurisdiction. as we'll find out in just a few minutes, the biggest problem and the biggest activity which genealogists are involved in is trying to find the records and gain access to the records. So if you look at the Family Search Catalog, what you're going to see is a list of places. So if I search for England, for example, and let's just switch over here and do a search for England. And when we click on England, we get a whole list of records. These are the records at the national level. We click, we get a list of all of the counties in England. And if we get to the right county, we can get a list of all the subdivisions. These are parishes within the counties. And then for each parish, there are a number of records. Now, as you go down through this, you'll see there's a list of categories here. And if you read down through this list, you'll see that there are records for church records, there are poorhouse records, public records, school records, taxation records. And as a genealogist, your job and the way that this works is that we become familiar with and learn how each of these categories of records works and are able to do searches in those categories for information about our ancestors and relatives. So the question is, have we broken away from the idea of fixating on the 4 or 5 major sets of records, census records, vital records, death records, like cemetery records, and a few others? Do we really understand that to find information that may not be contained easily or easily extracted from those particular kinds of records, we have like a universe of other records out there that we can refer to that may have additional information. Now, if your family is like, we're like my family and part of my family, some of my families were extremely poor. Some of my ancestors were just poor, and they were poorhouse category people. And the only way we were able to find them is to search through the poorhouse or search through the records of how they were so poor. Some of my family members ancestors were so poor that they were given a subsidy by the English government, the UK government, to leave and go to Australia. This was not being transported because they were criminals. They were simply shipped out because the poorhouse didn't want to take care of them. They didn't want to do that expense. It was cheaper to pay their way to Australia and give them some land in Australia than it was to support them in England. So there's lots of areas here that when this opens up to you, when you begin to understand that there is this endless list of places to look, then genealogy becomes, let's say, a greater challenge. But on the other hand, it really becomes interesting because you can't really get to the end of it. It's like having an endless exploration party. You never get to the goal. You always are waiting, always able to find more avenues of information that you did not know about and you need to learn about. And I am constantly learning about new avenues of information. In the last couple of weeks, I have found tremendous resources for certain kinds of information that would be directly related to finding out and identifying some of the people I'm researching. So the main activities of genealogists or family historians are to identify, locate, and access records. Now, you may have been thought all along that the idea that what you were trying to do as a genealogist was to find a name. Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, I was searching for an individual just in the last hour or so and found that individual with the name for about a dozen people with exactly the same name, living within a few miles of each other in England and being born at about the same time. And the only way we're able to differentiate between all of those people and come up with an identity on an individual is to focus on the records and locate those records and attach those records and find those records that correspond to events in the ancestor's life, so that the location is the most important possibility. That's the only way we can differentiate between all these different people out there with the same names. And believe me, there are a lot of people with the same names. The other day, somebody sent me an obituary of James Tanner, who had passed away. And I can assure you that it wasn't me. So that's part of this process that we go through. Okay, so let's look at some of the jurisdictions that might be given in any particular location. This happens to be Annapolis, Maryland, and we lived there for about a year, digitizing records just up there by the Naval Academy and the Maryland State Archives. So we're familiar, and there's a street we lived on while we were there, Spa Road, right in the middle, just above where it says West Winds. So what were the jurisdictions that might be available at this location? This is in Annapolis, Maryland, and I thought I'd just list a few. This is kind of a representative sample of the jurisdictions, and it will hopefully give you an idea of the kinds of things we're talking about. Obviously, there's federal jurisdiction. Maryland is a state in the United States, and there are federal laws that apply. And because it was in Maryland, the District of Columbia is surrounded on some of the sides by Maryland. And so there is federal jurisdiction over a lot of different things. There are federal military bases, there are federal buildings and facilities all over Maryland. The state level jurisdictions, we were working in the Maryland State Archives, and they were under the direction of the state of Maryland. And there's other records that are kept by the state. There's all of the vital records like deaths and births and other things that are kept by the state. Annapolis had its own city records, city jurisdiction records. They keep records of taxation and of zoning questions and all sorts of issues. There are schools. There are lots of school districts in Annapolis, and each of the school districts had rosters and lists of the students, and many of them published yearbooks and had records of that nature. There's taxation districts, and people had to pay taxes on a city, state, and federal level. And you may have even ended up paying a homeowners association plus your city tax, plus your state tax, plus your federal tax. And sewer districts, organized everybody, every house, let's say nearly every house in business was connected to the sewer. So there would be sewer districts, utility districts for lights, power, gas, all of the things that come from utilities. There were a number of universities and colleges in Maryland, the University of Maryland and others, and other major universities and colleges. There was the Naval Academy, which was a federal institution from the Navy and was across the fence from the archives where we worked, and where we had to go on and show a federal identification card in order to get entry and to visit the Naval Academy. There are private businesses, lots of private businesses. They all keep records. All of these have records. We have historic buildings. They're under somebody's jurisdiction. There were national monuments and national parks and monuments in Maryland, and national historical locations, including all of those in the District of Columbia, which is not part of Maryland, but was definitely close and part of what you might call the neighborhood. Marinas, there were a lot of boats registrations, and there's just thousands and thousands of boats along the Chesapeake Bay and up the rivers around Annapolis and around the Naval Academy. transit systems. There's a major metro system in Washington, D.C., and access to that is around the perimeter of the District of Columbia. But each of the cities and in the area also have their own municipal transit bus systems. All of these employ people, keep records, and all of them are jurisdictionally searchable. In other words, the big issue then becomes, once you understand that all of these jurisdictions, all of these different subdivisions keep records. This happens to be a photograph of the U.S. Food Administration records arriving at the National Archives. So I just thought it might be interesting to see that they hauled them in large boxes and crates and things. So the more you learn about genealogy and genealogical research, the more records you'll find. It's just inevitable that your horizon expands, your vision expands, and you have this opportunity that just completely becomes completely. It empowers you with the ability to understand that no matter how difficult the problem may seem, that it really is an issue of who would have kept the records, or which entity would have kept the records, where was their jurisdiction, and where would those records have gone. And what we have today by means of the internet and searches on the internet is that we have a means to actually access or find out where those records might be kept. So basically, I'm going to give an example, and the one I like to give is railroads, because it's one of the organizations that had the greatest impact on the United States as far as transportation and as far as employment. And it's a very good example of what kinds of records might be available. So by 1900, the number of railroad employees exceeded 1 million, with tens of thousands making a living in related fields such as producing railway supplies. And these roaders were men and women of all races, faiths, and political persuasions. And that's just a quote off of of an article that talks about the railroad records. So every one of those individuals had a record for their employment. And everything that happened on the railroads had a record. And the answer, and the question then is, where are all the records? And that's the questions that we answer as genealogists. We do what is necessary to find out where these railroad records went. Once you know that there's railroads, wait a minute, there's roads, there's railroads, there's canals, there's airplanes, there's airports, there's employees in all of those. Where are the records? And where would they have been kept? It's sometimes kind of, I think it's very, very discouraging to think that all the records have disappeared. They haven't. They're out there. They're just two problems: finding them and accessing them. We may be able to find where they're located, but we may not be able to get access. And on the other hand, we may have difficulty in finding the records, but that is generally an issue of where we look and how persistent we are in looking. So here, for example, and this is just one example, and had I the time, and if you had the endurance, then I could spend an hour on railroad records, and or I could spend a day on railroad records. Say that many times really fast. Now, this are the Railroad Retirement Board records. There was a Railroad Retirement Board, and you would probably need to do some research and think about what happened when somebody was employed by the railroad, and find out that they had to pay into a fund for retirement. They had to pay retirement funds. a pension fund, or whatever you want to call it. But they got a little bit of money after they retired. And so there were all of the people who retired records were kept of their retirement. Now, look at what, and you may not be able to read it on your screen. So let me just read a little bit of what it says down here. The National Archives at Atlanta, that's Atlanta, Georgia, has received approximately 54,000 cubic feet of Railroad Retirement Board inactive claims folders from the National Archives Great Lakes region. Okay, now what would the Great Lakes region? You'd need to look and find out what is included in the National Archives Great Lakes region. That's a jurisdiction of the National Archives. And once you know that, you might be surprised that there's a lot of railroads in there. Chicago, for example. And you're thinking, okay, so are the records for the Chicago railroads in Atlanta? Yes, that's apparently the issue here. And how would you know that the records were in Atlanta? Good question. But basically, when you begin to, in a sense, dissect, split up, analyze each of the jurisdictions and each of the types of records that were kept, and then ask question after question, and you will begin to understand that this process, so there are employment records for the railroads, there are probably disability records for the railroads, and there were retirement records for the railroads, and there are probably any number of other kinds of railroad records that were being kept across the country. But how much is 54,000 cubic feet of records? How long will it take you to go through 54,000 cubic feet of records if you're trying to find something? Is it indexed? We don't know that. Is it digitized? Absolutely not. Not even a chance. So basically, what would you have to do? You would need to go to Atlanta. You would have to qualify as a reader in the National Archives, go through their training, get a reader's card, gain access, and then spend the time necessary to get into how these records are organized and try and extract the information as you requested records. And they looked them up and they brought them to you as you requested them. You're not going to just to be able to go in and start pulling records and looking at them. That isn't the way the National Archives works. There's a second sentence here that says the information found within these records will be of interest to genealogists and historical researchers. So here comes up a question that comes up frequently. What percentage of the records that are kept by the National Archives in all of the National Archive branches and at the main National Archives and the auxiliary buildings that where additional records are kept from the main National Archives building in Washington, D.C. There's a largest one is in Virginia, and there's another one in the northern part of Washington, D.C. So there are other National Archive locations around the country, such as Denver and Los Angeles and San Francisco and et cetera. Okay, so each of those National Archives locations has their own storage, their own records. And so what would it take to get to these records and find them? That's the question that you would have to ask and research and answer in order to gain access to these particular records. So why would you do that? Well, if you had a question that you thought was absolutely could only be answered by that question, by looking at these records, then you probably would do that. And this is the issue with all the records around the country. The only thing that makes genealogy as popular and as easy as it is today, if the word easy can be used with genealogy, which I don't necessarily believe, but it's being advertised as easy because certain number of records, billions, but only a small percentage of the total amount of records have been digitized and are searchable on the internet. And yet there's these vast sets of records that haven't even been very much made available, much less broadcast, much less had anything else that you could have. Okay, so understanding that they're scattered all over the country and around the world, your logic is you're saying, well, okay, the railroad was in Chicago. Maybe I should go to Chicago to look for the records. Maybe. But had you thought about Atlanta? Probably not. And so that's why doing research is and has been forever a challenge. So you need to ask yourselves, where did your ancestors work? There's other questions. Where did they go to church? And when you talk about either one, who kept the records and where are the records kept? And those are the questions that you ask. So I just threw in this so you'd have some idea. Here are a list of the names in Swedish of the different Swedish occupations. This is on the Family Research Wiki, and it shows there are over 800 occupations listed. That may not be exhaustive. There may be many more very narrow occupations that didn't make this list. But these are occupations that appear on the census records for Sweden. And if you know that, then these particular occupations can become a way of identifying your particular person as opposed to everyone else with exactly the same name. It is possible, of course, that someone had the same name and both of them were butchers or shoemakers or tanners or tailors. But on the other hand, that may be the one distinguishing factor. If you take an occupation with the location and with the person's name and their family, their spouse and their children, then you'll be given a much higher, a stupendously higher possibility of identifying a unique person. If you ignore any of those, and you ignore the jurisdictions and the records and the possibility of other records being available, then your chances diminish dramatically from the degree of accuracy. Now, you might think it's pretty easy if you find a census record and match it up. In the United States, that might be something that is easier than other things or less stressful than other things. In Sweden, that may not be the case. Finding people when they are using patronymics is a great challenge. And so there's things that you need to be more aware of, all of the different kinds of records. Over here on the right-hand side of the screen, there's always in the Research Wiki a list of record types. And these are the record types that you should be understanding. And if you read in the wiki is like a handbook of how to find and how to understand all these records. So that's why it's important that we understand these records. Here's a list, for example, of what's in the Research Wiki of types of United States business records. I picked on railroads, which are down there at number 12 on that list over there on the left-hand side. But you have mortuary records, farming and agricultural, slaves, apprentice and indentured servants, insurance, newspapers, unions, minings, on and on. Churches, business licenses, professional licenses, hospitals. All of these entities have kept records. Now, where would you begin to look? Well, I would start with mining records and put in where are mining records as a search in Google, for example. And you will find a tremendous response to that, pages and pages of explanation about where different mining records are kept. If you are thinking about where these might be kept, you would probably first think of libraries and archives, museums, historical societies, genealogical societies, any other kind of repository that may be necessary. But one of the biggest repositories for these kinds of records, the professional and business records, are the libraries of the major universities and colleges. And they have what are called special collections records. And when you get into special collections records, is where you begin to see the breadth of how many different types of jurisdictions there are and how many different types of records can be kept. So this is the kind of place where you really, really need to start digging in and making a difference. And this, I kind of blew it up a little bit, part of this list, so you could see some of the different types of records. Now, the question that I guess would be the one that always comes around, it always says, well, do you look in those kinds of records? Do I personally look in those records? I can say that as I go down that list, that I have at one time or another in the last few years looked at least almost every one of those kinds of records at some point in time when doing research. So this is not something that is just theoretical out there. This isn't a, well, maybe for him, but kind of thing. No, this is the kind of thing where when you're doing your research, you may very well decide that people need those records. Let me take mining records for just a short example here. Let's say your family lived in Utah and you traced them and they came up in the census record and they lived in Mercer or Ophir, Utah. You may never have heard of those locations. So when you do a little bit of research, you may find out that they're mining locations. People who lived in those towns were totally dependent on the mines. And in many instances, the mines owned all the land and they were simply there renting property. And the mining records contain all of the information about these families. So if you follow any one of these, you can see how important they are. So who collects these records? Why do they get collected? Well, the answer is that many of the jurisdictions are required by the various laws of the states and the national laws and state laws to keep records, and for a period of time. And sometimes those records get kept for a lot longer than they necessarily have to be kept. In many states, real estate sales records, for example, have to be kept for a certain number of years. But as I have found, that there are some people and always some organizations that never get rid of their records. And so these records pile up and eventually end up in various repositories. Do we bat 1,000 in this realm? Do we hit it at a home run every single time we start to look for records? No. Sometimes it's very frustrating. We go through thousands of pages of records and we never find the information we're looking for. But that's part of the part and parcel of being a genealogist and being a researcher. And to repeat, again, locating and accessing records are the main activities of genealogical research. So when you're thinking about it, if you can spend 2 minutes thinking, you'll start to realize that that there's lots of places where you could have looked, or you should look, or that you might look. And that will certainly happen if you start looking at the research, at the Family Search Research Wiki. Okay, so let's look at a census record here. This US Census record is, I forgot, 1900 census. And you can see here that if they put in an occupation and the number of months employed, that you would have a suggested place to look. If it shows that they were educated and can read and write, you could start looking for school records. If you see it says home owned or rented, you would probably find real estate, land and property records, and maybe probate records. Home free of a mortgage, you might find bank and mortgage records And if they own it free of the mortgage, then you would definitely find land and property records, and you'll probably find a probate record, meaning what happened when the person died. If they have a farm or a house, then you have farm records, you have agricultural records. You may have co-op records from an agricultural co-op. You may have subsidy records from the government. There's just an endless number of records that could have happened or might have happened had you looked a little further than the 1900 census. So where would you start looking? You start looking by putting the search terms here in Google. You look for the occupation, or you look for the jurisdiction, or you look for whatever. So for example, let's say I go back to Texas and I say, I want to look for Grayson County, Texas records. Okay, I go Grayson County, Texas records. That's my search. And I go look and see what it says where the records are in Grayson County. And if you want to know about Texas marriage records, you say Texas marriage records, and it'll tell you, Google will find those references to telling you about those particular records. So Google is kind of the gateway place, the easiest place to get into. So where else do you start? Well, how about starting in the largest online, completely accessible collection of records in the world right now, as far as I can determine. And that is the Internet Archive. And they have been collecting records and continue to collect records at a tremendous pace. And you look at the little icons across, they have 717 billion web pages. That's of all the information in the past on the internet. They have 35 million plus, and that's going up rather rapidly, of books, completely digitized, searchable word for word, 88.3 million videos, and on with all of the other categories of records that you might want to explore. How do you get there? The address is right up there. It's archive, archive.org. Not archives with an S, not com. All those will take you to people who are trying to trying to catch on to the coattails of the Internet Archive. So basically it's archive.org, and it's like beginning your search and launching off into the largest possible collection of records that can be imagined. When they talk about the largest library in the world being the Library of Congress, the Library of Congress estimates that they have 23 million texts. The Internet Archive passed that a long time ago, and now it's well over 35 million. And I would guess maybe by the end of this year, if not early in the next year, it'll go over 36 million. The Family Search Research Wiki, there is no way that you can tell people or show people or explore anything more than you can with the Research Wiki. I use this almost as regularly as I could possibly imagine. Worldcat. Worldcat has the catalog collections of over 10,000 libraries, and that's way out of date, folks. It's over 2 billion entries, probably way over 2 billion entries. And it is another way to search and to find, and this will tell you exactly where the things are. If you go to the Worldcat, it will tell you exactly which library it's in. And if you put in your zip code, it will basically tell you how far away it is from where you live. You may not even know this exists, but we do have a Digital Public Library of America, and it has been growing for about the last 10 years or so. And it includes presently about 46 million plus images, text, videos, and sounds from across the United States. And that includes an awful lot of genealogical records and information. And what I'm pointing out here is that other than the big genealogical websites, there are vast resources with billions and millions of records that may not even be in or even cataloged by the major genealogical websites. This is another part of the OCLC, which is the Worldcat Catalog. And OCLC.org maintains the archive grid and includes 7 million records describing the archival materials. This isn't the actual records. This is a catalog of 7 million lists of archival material that are in the various archives. And it's just like those records in the National Archives, where it was 58,000 cubic feet. Each one of those 7 million records has a length of a number of inches or feet or yards of records attached to it. So I went back to U.S. railroads, and here's the University of Iowa has a page, Special Collections Library and Archives. And this is one of the library archives. And here they are. Here's a huge collection of different railroad, by the railroad's names, different railroad records, including correspondence, administrative, legal matters, property, financial, all kinds of records having to do with different organizations. Okay, so the amount of information is endless, sort of like this picture here. But that doesn't mean you need to be discouraged. That should make you empowered. It makes you understand that you have not only unlimited resources in a sense, but that you can, as you begin to learn, that there's almost unlimited opportunities to learn and keep learning about genealogy. What I've always said over the years, from back when I started back in now over 40 years ago, is that if it weren't so hard, I would never have stayed and never have continued to have interest in genealogy, because I would have gotten really tired of it real quick. But because it's so difficult and because it's such a challenge, it is something that can keep your interest for a long time. So keep looking and keep learning, and thanks for watching.